Well, kia ora everybody. Welcome to Future Whenua Yarns, having conversations that matter because conversations become matter. I'm Zeb.
And Rob over here. I noticed we've gone back to conversations that matter.
Yeah. Caught up with Michael last week and was inspired by the concept once again.
Of course.
This is episode number 6. It's a lucky number of ours, and we decided we'd just have a conversation with the two of us and really get into the who are we, where have we come from, and where are we going. So,
where are we going?
Where are we going?
Where did we begin? It's rather appropriate, actually.
Yeah, so this is where we began on this very stage. It's actually the DJ stage for Burning Horse, which you might cover, but it was repurposed as our speaker stage for the first Future Whenua Summit, which was born last year in March, with the idea that we wanted to hold a summit, a 3-day gathering based on education but also experience of some of the progressive concepts that we could adopt in the rural sector as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I mean, jumping back just a little prior to the actual summit itself, do we want to talk a little bit about sort of like how it came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So without going into the whole history of me and Rob individually and together, I grew up on this land. I'm third generation on the property, and I came home about 6 years ago, and I just knew I wanted to make a few changes. The plan was to let's get outside. Got the dogs down here, so if you hear a bit of that and you're listening on audio, apologies. But the original plan was just to build some self-sufficiency. I'd been inspired from the travels and a few volunteering stints I'd done, and what started as learning how to grow healthy tomatoes led into permaculture, led into regenerative agriculture. So we started making some big changes on the property and how we run our sheep system. We also held Burning Horse Festival, so that began about 5 years ago as a party with friends. It evolved into my brother sort of building and designing this stage, which is all out of, or mostly farm materials. And then all of a sudden we've got hundreds of people coming to the farm and really enjoying this experience, a unique sort of Kiwi, it's not a necessarily an agricultural experience at Burning Horse, but it is a taste of being on the land. And then, trying to evolve the self-sufficiency from my back garden feeding the household to something that we can feed a festival of over 500, maybe 1,000 people. And so we needed to really extend the gardens. So it started becoming this experimental mindset of like large-scale permacultural production, and sort of just throughout this was really getting a taste of this entrepreneurial passion that I had. And so while I was working on this food producing method called polyculture paddock, that was when I met Rob, who was working on a pretty intense project.
Yeah. So I was coming at the same problem from sort of the opposite direction. So you were trying to figure out what to do with this, food systems now and how to feed this group, and I was looking at how do we feed the planet in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years sort of concept. So yeah, I was taking it more from a robotics angle of, automated sort of permaculture. Can permaculture be done at an industrial scale and still maintain, the efficacy and the beneficial effect on the environment? And yeah, what a fantastic sort of meeting of the minds, the way we've approached these two topics. So Future Whenua, I mean, it's a funny thing because you actually had the name before I came down here, as far as I remember. You'd been mulling over the name, and then we'd been starting to talk about the summit, and that idea of the Future Whenua, it's such a kind of duality because it is this idea of the future and also yet grounded in the past and in the land itself. And yet also for our skill sets to be so complementary in that regards. I do find that's such an interesting part of sort of the genesis of this whole thing, because it's also very much like I undeniably I'm a tech head. Like, I love technology. I just find it utterly fascinating, and I want to apply it to improving our conditions. And you're coming at it from very much that sort of grounded in the land experience of having grown up in a place like this. So it's that beautiful sort of duality of the two things working together.
Exactly, yeah. So the future being this sort of technological Western concept, and the whenua obviously means land in te reo for any of you non-Kiwis listening. and so the future of the land. But yeah, obviously using whenua, it sort of incites some of these ancestral concepts, and obviously it's this grounded, and I can be something of a Luddite, so yeah, the unison of you and I, and also this unison of future and whenua. And so that gets like what is future whenua? Well, fundamentally it's an idea that we just alluded to there, that's this merging of two sort of different ideas, and it's that space in between where we can maybe make a big impact and turning the ship around or addressing some of the issues that we're up against. And then more solidly, in the eyes of the system, we're a charitable trust. We registered last year after the inaugural summit, and really we're thinking, so what do? We organise this annual event, but it was sort of facing like, what's our primary issue that we're facing against? We've got these early stage projects, it's pre-revenue, it's really just in the exploration phase, it's regenerative, it's impact focused, so already that fits in is it a charitable purpose, or is it a for business, for profit venture, and we're sort of in between there. And so we sort of started to narrow it down as what would Future Whenua Charitable Trust, what's the primary focus? So it's about education and promoting some of these ideals and really coming to define what rural enrichment is. But it's also about empowering regenerative entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think it's the idea, entrepreneurialism, all these things, and it's something that I'm very proud of in our founding document, is that first spiel about the idea of how resources get biased into urban settings. Because I don't think there's any malice, I don't think there's any intent behind it, but it does inherently drive innovation in an urban-centric mindset. And I think that's that, again, it is the invocation of what Future Whenua is, because it is the idea that you can hold these high technical ideals in a land setting, and you can use, the land to also inform, there's just the ways in which they combine very beautifully. And I think it is that extension of those efforts that will eventually see, Future Whenua in its totality, which is this sort of flourishing, what we're starting to kind of play around with the word eco-punk society. And I'll get into an explanation of, why it's called eco-punk at a later date. But, this idea of a society that cherishes the land whilst exploring the frontiers of technology, not one at the sacrifice of the other.
Maybe. So yeah, we're thinking, okay, so we want to empower regenerative entrepreneurship, and what does that mean? And with Burning Horse and Polyculture Paddock, I'd gone through a number of incubators and gone down to Invercargill and talked with Great South and Coin South and Queenstown. We have Startup Queenstown Lakes, and these have been really good services, and it's great what they're doing in their respective zones. But as someone that's coming from the land, I was a little out of place in this urban environment, and it was just, I was thinking, I could adapt to that situation, but really it was, if there was facilities and education and resource, particularly for the farmer type, and these are not traditionally people that are adept at jumping through hoops and bureaucracy and paperwork, and that's a huge part of what the process is to starting a business. So we find that farmers have this number 8 mentality, and Kiwi know-how, and you could travel to any farm in the neighbourhood and you'll find someone that's doing an invention of their own, or like some modification of an existing tool, and it's just, if these things were able to get out into the world more, and if the people that are on the front edge and actually coming up with solutions that could have significant impact, if they could propagate those ideas without the layers of bureaucracy and hoop jumping that's required. So it's really about like, how do we simplify that process and make it more applicable to the regenerative entrepreneur, to the farmer.
Yeah, I mean, that whole idea of the number 8 wire sort of mindset, I think it goes beyond just resourcefulness. There's a direct relationship between the farmer and their tools. In a mining setup, you might have similarly sized equipment, but somebody else owns it. It's a company, it's a structure, it's a management thing. Whereas the farmer is there at the coalface going, if I don't fix this piece of equipment, that has a direct impact on me. It's not a company that I represent. So there's an inherent sort of it forces you to think in that resourceful fashion because you're the one who has the direct consequence of the failure. And I don't think I've seen much farm equipment that hasn't in some way been tweaked or modified, or fixed, or just repaired in a moment with something that looks, rather odd, but it's a perfectly effective repair, and this person goes on about their life. Whereas, these other systems, these complex chains of sort of maintenance and repair, it can slow things down dramatically. You can have months of backlogs because of one part being missing, because the whole system grinds to a halt when it doesn't have that flexibility. So it's a hugely important mindset to get around, and I think that taking that entrepreneurial mindset through the sort of the farmer's eyes is a fascinating way of combining, these two worlds. And I think that we are focused on land-based innovation, but I do also think that there would be a benefit for those who are thinking about heavily urban-centered projects, but coming and viewing that back through that mindset of, make, do, and repair to kind of keep going.
Absolutely. And by no means, is our inspiration to solely support farmers. It's, a regenerative entrepreneur. It can be all sorts of things. It can come from a science background. It's someone in a township that's creating urban farming. It's got this grounded from the land, earth cycles orientation. So one of the initial purposes of Future Whenua Charitable Trust is just to consolidate the projects that we're already working on and create a home for some of the aspiring projects of the future. So we're working on the ones I've mentioned, Polyculture Paddock, the Burning Horse. We helped start a community garden in Riversdale. And there's some other ones that we're working on, dabbling with this Mongolian wool felting. So we're sort of seeing how can we utilize our own wool. And so these are things that are already in existence and that we're just starting to work on. So really having one entity that these could be consolidated through, and it has that Future Whenua link that ties them all together. And so there's our own projects that exist currently, there's the projects that we'll want to work on internally in the future, and there's also the entrepreneurs and the farmers and the innovators on the grassroots that we're already connected with. And that's quite a number. Through the last two summits we have a solution session, which are people that are doing the mahi on the ground, and they've come and spoken for 20 minutes about their specific solution. And that was part of the thread and the rationale behind what we're trying to do with this Future Whenua initiative, is because they're all facing the same issues. It's funding, and because they're trying to solve an issue, it's quite impact focused, and sometimes that can but may not lead to profitability. So it was just this connection with a number of outside projects as well as our own that would really like to help. And so we're starting obviously with what we already have and trying to move along with that, and then just a phased approach beyond that about how we can extend our impact and our support outside of ourselves.
I think you could make the argument that we've been sort of informally making support here and there with various people who are in our networks and we're working with. Is it Rick? I should remember, being a great example. Is it Rick?
Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, sorry, I'm terrible with names. Yeah, so that's a great little packaged example of somebody who came here, got to witness, from step one all the way through to a sort of finished thing. And I think even though it's just a plaque, an engraved plaque, that opens up his mind now to a whole new kind of realm of possibilities around the way he displays information or the way he presents an idea to his clientele.
Well, and their whole project at Wellspace is really bringing people out of Queenstown onto this beautiful rural patch of land where people get their bare feet on the ground, and it's all about wellness.
Yeah.
And so to witness, we did the full farm property tour. I gave a bit of an insight into how we'll lay things out visually and our attention to resources. So yeah, absolutely, I hear what you're saying. We have informally been gaining from and supporting outside projects already.
I think there'll just be that stage where it becomes really more of a formalized process where we have, what we've talked about, not the traditional send in a piece of paper, we'll review it and send you a dispassionate email back, but that sort of, process of communication between parties taking place, ideally actually here on farm, and then we'll start to really sort of get into that thing of formally supporting other projects.
Okay, so let's get into that. So when we start talking about this support for entrepreneurs, we're particularly talking about the Future Whenua initiative. Future Whenua being the idea, Future Whenua Charitable Trust being the way that we're registered and set up, and the Future Whenua Initiative really being this program for incubation and prototyping.
That's not to forget Future Whenua Yarns and Future Whenua Summit.
Yeah.
Just to make sure the list was complete. Yeah,
absolutely.
Along with raw nutrition and everything else.
So for the initiative, what's the plan? What does it look like in 5 years' time?
Yeah, so for me it is that it's a flourishing centre of excellence for the research and development of ecologically, governed projects. We could obviously be talking and dealing with incredibly talented people doing amazing projects, but for me, and I believe you feel similarly, it's most important that it's viewed through that lens of what is the most we can do in our time to improve the situation on the land. So as much as there are other projects that have benefits, maybe there's one that's focused around, I don't know, sub alpine something or another. We're just going to struggle to really serve that need because it's not our environment. But anything that's based around that sort of, productive temperate environments and what we can do to help them, then I think this is the home for those kinds of things. The bigger the goal, the bigger the dream, the higher the moonshot, the better.
So this is the home. That would be, for one, this is an entity that they could approach to support, or else we'd seek them out, passively and just extend our offer of support. But this actually will be a home here on the farm, not right next to the river because this thing does flood, but somewhere near the yards we'll have a purpose-built facility that is geared for prototyping.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's it needs to be capable of handling anything that we are going to be able to do the research on the land here to fabricate. So everything from your CNC, your 3D printing, through to soft fabrics. We're obviously textiles is another area where we're quite interested in exploring, especially around wool, hemp, these kinds of things. So I'd love to have a full fully kitted out textiles lab. I think all of these things, it will obviously be staged, and we've talked about that a lot in our sort of documentation around looking at that 3 phases of development. But in 5 years, I'm pretty optimistic and pretty positive around seeing a really, quite comprehensive facility for prototype and, service development.
Absolutely. And so in the early stage, we already have quite a awesome woodworking shop, people, but it's just because we live half an hour from the closest city, 10 minutes from a township, but it's, for people to come out here, we really need some accommodation. So we've been looking at all sorts of ways of how do we create, places to stay, but do that ecologically. So we've taken a deep dive into all things natural building, and one of the projects that we're sort of exploring quite densely at the moment is this idea of 3D printing houses with clay.
Yeah, I mean, clay being the jumping off point, I think there's a lot of exploration to be made around the combination of the various natural materials. And some of them I'm not going to reveal on camera yet because I want to kind of play with them first before I get too excited about them. But yeah, the idea of being able to take local biomass and rapidly and repeatably make some of the world's most, healthy structures. And I mean that healthy from the human perspective, but also healthy from the environmental perspective. Based on hyper-locality. You're taking things from within, a half hour's drive of where you live. That changes so many of the considerations around home construction. And yeah, just for what we're doing here, it's game-changing, but also potentially, world-changing on its implications. And, we're not the only ones doing it, obviously. We're not the first by a long shot, but I think there is a lack of development in that direction in the sort of, in the part of the world that we find ourselves in.
I only bring that up for one because it is a fundamental and important stage of our development here on the property is this structure, and perhaps we've looked at straw bales just because there's grain farmers all around and we can do the framing with untreated pine, and we've got access to that, so that would be one that we can really source the construction materials locally. But it was just through this series of synchronicities and perchance, which is what guides us a lot through this journey.
It has so far, yes.
And ended up meeting Amos, who's a 3D printing sort of guru, and that was in a relatively short amount of time, we'd built a team, and this includes Howard, who knows all sorts of geopolymer information, and he's done natural building that has been gone through the regulation in 5 different continents or something.
It's
a number of different.
Pretty experienced.
So the team sort of came together quite quickly, and it's also just a really fundamental Future Whenua idea, because if we can build with clay in the way that we've done for generations and millennia, then but we can take this 3D printing technology, which is really exploding in the building scene, and as a means of like how can we actually create, like, address this housing crisis.
Well, it's that funny, because to say, I'm going to go live in a mud hut, or you should go live in a mud hut, is almost sort of the zenith of insults as to where you're going to go and live. I suppose one worse would be cardboard box, so to take that concept of a mud hut is the sort of like the worst mental imagery one can conjure of a place to live, and turn it into the most exciting concept of a place to live, it is the perfect representation of being Future Whenua, because it is going ancient methodology, cutting edge technology, synthesis of the two, and what do you have? And you have a 3D printed earthen structure.
And so as soon as we were sort of bouncing this with Amos, of course he knew organisation WASP in Italy, who are doing just this. They'll essentially dig a hole here, print the house here. House has a nice pond with clay. It's hyper-locality, absolutely. And so we're just in the early stages of exploring that, and it'll be an amazing one if that was sort of where we break out and into the business world.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's one of the sort of vectors for that project. The other is also just creating gigantic artworks and sculptures, because we're both quite fond of making big sort of interesting pieces of structure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, if you come down to the festival grounds in the next 5 years, there might be some rather exciting things going on.
Flock of clay mower. Yeah, so that's one aspect of where we'll be in 5 years, and another, there'll be some of our projects we'd like to have thought might break through this early stage and really be generating some income, and that will be funneling back into the Future Whenua broader ecosystem to allow us to keep doing the R&D internally and keep supporting projects externally. We'd like to be hosting events such as the Oasis Week we've talked about, which is the sort of antithesis of a Hell Week that the Navy SEALs go through to really bond people and strengthen their ties. That also helps them get into flow, which helps them generate much more effective output what they're going through. So
I don't want to mislead anyone, but to say it's the antithesis of Hell Week, I mean, there will be challenges. You will be challenged, just not in the way that you bring you within a few millimeters of death. It's a different approach, but it is still using that sort of, call it the sort of trial by fire, but in a very, controlled and sort of, to say loving setting sounds wrong, but I think it's also the right way of saying it, in that it's a sense of like, it's a sense of desire for the person to achieve their best, and to reveal, what that inner character can be when put under stress, or when, asked to rise beyond what they think they're capable of. Our entrepreneurs and would think, a group of 10, 12, something like this would come together, and we spend a week together, and everyone has their own ideas that we'll get to work on later in the week, but at the start, we'll be going, we'll get into the cold river and we'll walk barefoot along the trail and these things. It's just, we won't be getting into the cold river tied with sandbags and starved of sleep for 23 hours of the day. So this is one of the offerings we'd like to make, absolutely. And really it'd be about the ease of access to funding. That's the first and foremost hurdle for any stage to make it up. I mean, I'd say it's the dream killer of 99% of these types of projects, because there is just not the capital being invested. Look, New Zealand has quite a conservative investor landscape, and I think that comes from any island nation because it inherently has a conservatism around resources. So, I'm not trying to fault it, but there are too many good projects dying on the vine right now because of that lack of initial funding. Once you get going, there's definitely a lot of, players in the space that step in to help, and we've both been, witness to this, where you need that capital to get the key, to turn the key and get the engine started. and there just is a real lack of availability and and willingness to support from the startup community. There seems to be that sort of, you've got to make it on your own before we're going to take you seriously. But when it comes to projects with such an important environmental aspect, sometimes you don't have the time to slog away for 10 years.
Yeah, the time or the inclination. And yeah, I think it sort of leads to this, if the people getting funded are already at a certain level, then it more incentivizes iteration than true
Absolutely.
Innovation.
You're literally pulling out my favorite soapbox, which is that idea where sorry, I'm getting too excited and too frustrated at the same time, which is a weird mixture of emotions, because I love talking about this, but I am very frustrated with the way it goes right now, which is that we look at innovation as a 3% tweak here, a 5% change there. It's always about improvement of a current system, and we're very bad, because of the sort of baked-in costs and inertia in the system, of taking a step back and looking at things and unpeeling all of the assumptions and saying, hang on, have we been doing this whole time based on a number of assumptions that everyone, just because we were already moving, just kept rolling with? And yeah, it's the idea of true innovation is to cast aside all sort of prior assumption and prior bias and truly try and look at something in a new way. And I think we don't champion that.
So yeah, back to the funding. It's really like if they can just be given a leg up at this early stage, and whereas in the agri-tech sector especially, funding seems to be in the 20 mil here, 15 mil for you, 500 grand for you, but it's really difficult for someone that needs 50 grand to prototype or just to pay themselves so they can actually direct some energy towards it for a while.
Well, I'd also say that it's not even necessarily about having the 50 grand. It might be about having the 10 grand and access to $500,000 worth of equipment. It's actually the limiting factor as well, is that people can't, they can't set up a workshop on just, their own. So then how do you build the thing that you're trying to build? And there's a lot of startup facilities, but I'm not aware of any in New Zealand that come with a built-in fabrication lab. That's all stuff you have to figure out on your own. So that, I think, is a huge capability that we're also bringing to the table, which is that we're going to have the space to test and the facilities to actually make your thing come to life.
Absolutely. And so it might seem a little ambitious to be talking about just like handing out cash when we're sitting here building stuff out of scrap metal and mill wood from the farm, but it's just about really what we've been doing in the last 2 years is just building this story and the consolidation of these ideas and just the importance of this time right now. I suppose we're trying to set ourselves into a position that we could act as a regenerative fund. And I don't think that would be something that you and I would handle personally, but if it was, we can attract the right capital from the right people that want to create this impact in the world, which there are a lot of people, time and time again getting told it's not about there being enough money. The money's out there. It's just about how it's distributed. And so by constantly going and touring these farms of people that are doing cool stuff, I've sort of built this amazing network and actually have quite a good lay of the landscape in the south of who are the people that could really prosper if they were given a leg up in this manner.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, a big aspect I think of what we'd be able to do with this initiative, it's the prototyping, have a facility that could come and make this happen. It would be the fund, so we can actually just distribute it and give people the support they need. And then also maybe it would be like some centralized skill sets. If we were to build our team to have someone that knows how to do some of the hoop jumping, and someone, if we have a team of engineers or even one quality engineer that can guide a process here and there, we're talking about early stage prototyping. At least that's our focus at this point.
Well, but you've actually hit on a really, really important point there, is that all the equipment and all the facilities in the world mean nothing if you're stuck doing admin 99% of the time. And I think you and I have had moments like that in the last 2 years where you feel like you're a PR company talking about the thing that you actually want to build instead of getting the chance to build it, because you're always going around rattling the can trying to explain how cool it is, the thing that you'd actually just rather be building. and you end up in this weird sort of feedback loop where you start becoming a champion of something that you're not actually getting to create because you're having to go out there and be the champion of it. So I think centralizing resources around one organization that sort of acts as the champion for all projects under that banner, it streamlines and removes so many of the headaches and the hurdles, not just financial, but also just mental, commitment that somebody has to make to trying to get a very ambitious idea off the ground. Because that's, if not 50%, it seems like it could be more of the, mental burden is just trying to explain, and get people passionate about what you're building.
Precisely. So if we could have an internal team amongst that sort of umbrella, and someone comes in and they've got a idea for a new composting method, that person can't afford a secretary and a PR spokesman and, all these other roles. But if there were those roles that were covered and that were working across the board, then all of a sudden they can spend a month or two on this project, or they could offer their time in this project. And I just think it's a really effective means of doing that sort of human interaction and utilizing our skills on, and spreading out the impact of your skills to not just one organization but many projects.
Well, that's, and it's, funnily enough, we've been talking about another kind of idea around, sharing resources between these kind of critical pieces of infrastructure recently. But I think that is something that, again, a lot of startup incubators will offer is, we'll give you an hour with an accountant, we'll give you an hour with somebody. But to actually be part of the organization and to have someone, I don't want to create a scenario where you're just taking away someone's burden. Because I don't think you learn if you go, you don't have to worry about how a tax form works or how any of this works, because we're just making sure you can innovate. Because there are realities to this, that once you leave and go on to create your own thing, you're going to need to know how it works at the very least, even if you're not the one pressing the button. So it is that balance, but I think that it's really important. I suck at finance. Freely admit it. It's just not where my head goes, because if I can take it apart and put it back together again, I can understand it. Finance is this strange ethereal world where numbers move around in some magical way. So that has been a downfall of some of my prior projects, because I just haven't focused on that side of the equation, because it's just a painful area for my brain to go into. But having an organization there that was able to say, look, we will guide you through this and make it as painless as possible, would have freed up so much mental capital to actually make those ideas, come to life. And not just witness stuff fall apart for lack of a certain skill set, but it's just not the way my brain works. I hate to think of all the ideas that have failed to come to life because somebody lacked one particular key skill that they had to have at that super critical early stage.
Absolutely. And yeah, there's quality engineers, there's quality fabricators and carpenters, there's really inspired accountants. These roles exist all around us, and I'm very, very sure in conversations that I've had, and just a deep understanding that people coming towards this work of regenerating the land, of helping the future is it's satisfying work. It's soul gratifying.
Well, I'd actually, to kind of remove the third wall for a second and sort of speak to the audience, I think that to me it's a moment where I'd like to make that call to anyone listening, that don't think, if you're not a farmer, you're not a technologist, you're not a whatever it happens to be, don't think that you can't in some way start on this journey and even get in touch with us and figure out how you might work with us, because it's not, I've never been one that cares about what's on a CV. It's what drives you, it's what interests you, it's what you're passionate about that's the most important thing, because that's what's going to be pulling you forwards, not what's been sort of supporting you from behind. So I think if you are an amazing accountant and you love accounting, but you want to do something that's actually leaving an improvement as opposed to a detriment on this planet, then you can start figuring out how to do that, partnering with a community organization that's doing important environmental work, taking that burden off their shoulders. These are all skills that we still have to utilize, but if you want to be part of that solution, you don't have to be a gardener. You don't have to be someone who's putting the plants in the ground. There's a whole huge network of support that goes around something like this. And I think that we're at that position now where, yes, okay, accommodation, we need to be, that's a big thing for us to be getting onto, and a big part of the experience down here, because it is, being on the farm is such a part of that cultural experience. But get in touch. reach out. You know, if you've got some interesting skills in a certain area and you want to see how you can be involved, or you want to be involved in any project, find, you know, the best organization you can locally and reach out to them. Because I think it's a huge opportunity that people are missing on, is they assume that if they don't have a very specific skill set, they won't be welcome.
If you're a CEO or just a part of a larger organization that is doing really well in this, you know, capital system, and you want to support the work getting on the ground, you know, talk to us as well. You know, we could obviously use it in the development of our early stage, or we could talk about the number of people that we're connected with and say, hey, these guys could do with a hand up. You know, this can happen right away, and I suppose is happening.
And that's, you know, there's people doing really important work that with a relatively, you know, humble financial stimulus could be 10x, 100x where they were, you know, a week before.
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible. Like just the first summit. I mean, coming into this space, I've been much more technology looking. I've had some association with permaculture, but not really being a true sort of, you know, understanding of food systems and how they function. But coming into this space, it has been astounding how many people have come out of the woodwork that are doing amazing things that just aren't getting that boost, that aren't getting that popular support because those systems aren't there.
And it's another aspect of number 8 mentality, is it? One's ingenuity, and the other aspect is resourcefulness. What do farmers have? Well, we've got number 8 wire. Well, what's the problem? Oh, we'll fix it with number 8 wire. You use what's on hand, and as a result of this, you know, we can make a little go a long way. We've done that a lot here, and some of the people I've talked to, you know, they just have a patch of land, and now it's an oasis because they've started their own seedlings. They've created their own machinery.
Yeah, and that's, you know, when you design an object and you send it out into the market, you kind of go, okay, we're going to sort of, you know, create a band of what the average user will be. And sure, for the most part, a lot of people, that's fine. But when you are in this farm setting, your conditions are very specific to you. You know, here we're in low-lying kind of river valley territory, so it's you know, gravelly soils. It's all, you know, there's so many factors that are unique to this property that you therefore need to sort of tweak and customize the tools to make them best useful. And I've loved seeing around here some of the innovations that you've tried and then discarded. The fence rolling on the tractor and
spinning genie.
Yeah, you know, just stuff like that, where it's just like, that's actually quite a clever little idea. That sure, it got tried and maybe abandoned, but there's all these little things happening. You know, it's why I love going to farms, because you can always peek in a shed and see something that's, you know, someone's played with or messed with, or, you know, welded two things together that used to be one thing and now it's a, you know, totally different approach to doing what was otherwise a mundane or hard task or a challenging task. It was just made easier by one little second of tweaking.
Cool. So that's the initiative pretty well covered. And yeah, I guess we could just talk about return back to Future Whenua Summit. You know, so it will be an annual event. We're holding it. We started last year in March here, right here. It was kicked off by Damien O'Connor, the Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Damien.
Yeah. Cheers, Damo. It sort of definitely gave us the booster in terms of the credibility of an organisation that had before no name, no followers. So, but that whole event, it was a nice success, and we had live music, and we had a big bonfire, and it rained, and we moved down into the woolshed, and, you know, we had lamb sourced from the farm, if I'm allowed to say that, and
we'll just bleep that bit out.
Yeah. And people were engaged. People got connected. It was an awesome time, and you know, that sits on top of a brilliant bit of information and spreading of ideas that just is so essential that we hear about right now. And so we thought, if we did every second year on the farm and every other year on another property that was sort of embodying and practicing these principles. So last year we went up to Mangarara Station. And that was just absolutely fantastic to be hosted by Greg and Rachel Hart. They've just been stewarding the land in such a authentic and regenerative way for decades now. It's great what they're up to there, and it's really exciting the prospect of where we might head on the odd years moving forward.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of properties around that would be some pretty compelling exercises in getting up there for the summit. But yeah, I think And it's what actually, just to put a question to you, what prompted that idea of doing 1 year here, 1 year away?
Well, it was just that, the excitement of exploring another part of the country. Now we're quite strongly connected with a number of biodynamic gardeners in Hawke's Bay, for example. That couldn't have happened otherwise. And just, yes, being able to showcase Greg's farm and bring our essence and connect it there. I think it creates little nodes and it showcases more. It also gives us a bit more time to advance what we're doing here. So in the farm tour, which will always be a fundamental and one of the real hearts of the event, is the farm tour. You know, we were able to go to your workshop and to the multi-species as it was, and we did a workshop in the polyculture paddock. In 2 years' time from that, you know, we're moving fast. There's going to be more stuff to show. So giving that extra year off in between, in 2 years' time, if people are returning each time, they're going to continue to be surprised by and impressed, let's hope, by where we've been able to advance.
Yeah, I think that's important, you know, just for that sake of somebody returning here, there is that sense that progression has happened. You know, there isn't that kind of, you come back 1 year later and maybe some things have moved forward, others haven't, just because of the circumstance of time. But to really wow somebody every time they come back, I think is important in creating that sort of momentum of expectation, not only around what we're doing, but around what they expect to see elsewhere as well. You know, if you set the bar high for like in 2 years, look at what these guys have done, then that starts being the sort of the accepted pace of change for others. And I think in, you know, the circumstances and the times we're in, that's really important, to actually set a high bar for how quickly you can be moving.
Well, yeah, the time is of the essence. Yeah, that's for sure. And so Future Whenua Summit, it's about gathering people from across the sector. It's obviously for farmers to come and learn what the opportunities are there. It's for scientists. It's for agribusiness people.
Yeah, I mean, policymakers, you know, media. Like, I don't say media in the context that we want someone to come here and cover it, but to talk, to learn, you know, to be part of these communities for a certain period of time. It was something that I found very interesting. I can't remember who we were talking to recently, but we were talking about this idea that, you know, in a lot of sort of conference and summit settings, a key speaker will come, give their talk, and then depart. And, you know, there's obviously reasons behind that. They're busy people, they've got lots to do, but it's almost as important that they're part of that process as, you know, as an attendee, because they're being informed by the audience. There's that feedback and, you know, sort of give and take that comes with that I think is really critical. And I think that's an important part of, you know, what we're trying to do with Future Whenua Summit, is it's to create that cohesive experience, you know, throughout that whole weekend. It's not just dip in and out as you see fit. It's actually really to be taken on a journey through sort of these topics.
Yeah, we can continue to get some of the best speakers in the world. It'll still be the conversations in between and the space that we get to yarn and interact. That's really where the value is. The yarns around the campfire in the evening were, you know, as every bit as valuable as hearing from even Joel Sillerton.
Very much so.
So it's about getting those people together. It's about having a rich experience. It's about waving a flag way out here that we can start shifting towards. And you know, this change isn't for everybody. We see that there's a lot of resistance, and it's not. But for those of us that do have an inclination and a tendency towards change and innovation, we have to be moving even the faster. And even so it's about creating a home for that, and just the spreading of good quality information.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, and so that's where the Future Whenua Yarns was born. After the summit up at Greg's, it was just this. We can't wait 51 weeks before spreading it out, and we just wanted to keep the conversation flowing, and the list of people that we'd like to come and be a speaker for the summit, you know, it's a long list.
Never happened, yeah.
And so by having this essentially a podcast, it will just allow us to, you know, keep the momentum going, and also just include more ideas. And once again, we've started pretty high level.
Yep.
We've had a few on the grassroots, and hopefully that's just something we're able to continue. Just, you know, people throughout that have an idea that can help us, you know, moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of it, and, you know, something that we haven't probably really touched on yet is that idea of, you know, doing more, you know, say the ratio of talk to action. You know, and it's something that I think is probably a common frustration between both of us, is that you know, it seems like there's way more of the sort of the discussion and the bureaucratic wrangling than there is actually the action taking place to you know, mediate these changes. So I think that if we can act as sort of a model for, you know, organizations that are trying to do good, by saying that it's as important that you do the work than you go out there and you inform people about, you know, these changes and what needs to happen. And I think that is, you know, in some ways we probably, you know, swung pretty heavily in the first year on just getting stuff done and didn't communicate, you know, what we were doing to the wider world. And now in year 2 we've been sort of really, you know, swinging around and saying, okay, we need to balance these because we need to ensure that the work we're doing is being, you know, acknowledged and recognized. So I think that's where the podcast really sits for me, is that it's a wonderful tool to explain what we're already, you know, working on and functioning with, and who, you know, who is in our orbit and who we're interacting with.
Yeah, who are we drawing inspiration from?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And of course we'll be able to have more of these conversations that we can sort of nut out. Just, you know, we took a little dive into Strata, the 3D printing homes, but you know, that's a snippet. Like, these are things that we can talk on for hours and hours, and you know, have different nuanced perspectives on a certain thing. So we'll continue to bring some of the internal workings of Future Whenua to you, but yeah, really it's just about bringing some of these people that are inspiring us in their work and their solutions, and spreading that and bringing it from abroad and bringing it into rural New Zealand and just all the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's going to be exciting. Some big names on the list.
There are.
Yeah. I mean, we've already hit the zenith of farming with the world's most famous farmer. So I have to figure out how to top that one.
Yeah. I'm not worried about topping John Scottson because
I don't think you can.
He is at the top for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, should we perhaps wrap things up roughly? I'm pretty happy here.
No, I'm sitting in a stunning part of the world, watching some seagulls do their thing, thinking about Jonathan Livingston, just inevitably.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's hard to argue that this isn't the set and setting that I'd want to be in if I was going to create change in the world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening in. Hopefully you got a bit out of that. And until next time, ka kite.